Yeah, welcome to the Apex School of Drift. We're back once more, but for the long-awaited episode of tuning. We are going to cover the basics first, and I mean basics, and then we are going to cover every single piece of the puzzle fully in depth. This is the Apex School of Drift training mobile. This is the car that was used in the earlier episodes. We are actually going to use this vehicle um, purely only just to use as like a demo vehicle for the whole entire of the stream. Now this could be a 1 hour thing, this could be like a 4 hour thing. I have no idea how long it's going to take. But basics of this is tires. We're going to cover extreme basics because then we can just short form this into like a 3 minute video or something. Your tires, they provide grip from the car to the road. Very plain and simple. You have a softer compound, you're going to have more grip. You have a harder compound, you're going to have less grip. In a basic rule of thumb, when you go up tire, I don't want to say tire compound again, but if you go up in tires from comfort to sports, you're going to go up even more grip. Nobody drifts sports. You're a weirdo if you do. No offense, but like you're a bit weird if you do. Suspension. This is how you're going to get your personalized handling feel. Now, there's a lot of things you can do with suspension, whether it comes from, causing a car to squat really aggressively and be hyper aggressive on throttle, or you can have a really smooth and stiff car that really just likes to float along and not really do much in the suspension department. You can have that if you really ever so wanted to. Something more static. So there's a lot of movement here. You can do a hell of a lot with this, and I'll show you some things that you can do with this later on that are rather quite neat. Then you've got differential. It's very simple in principle. The lower the numbers, the more open it is. The higher the higher the numbers, the more locked it is. Now, what do I mean? More open means that the wheels are going to spin more freely of weight. So if you throw the car into a left side corner, right, your inside wheel is going to spin up a lot more freely because it's lighter off the ground with a more open differential. If you have a more locked differential, both of those wheels are going to be spinning more at the same time, which in drifting is very helpful, obviously, because then, and we'll get into the reason why, a more locked differential is generally going to create more oversteer, where a open differential is going to cause quite a lot of understeer, especially when you've got a softer suspension. If you've got a softer suspension setup, you can actually use a very locked diff and get away with using a really soft suspension. But if you're running something really stiff, you can get away with using a quite open differential, just purely on the fact that the wheels are spinning at much different rates with open differentials. So if you're doing that with a softer suspension, you're going to end up with a hell of a lot of ploughing understeer, and it just gets a little crazy. We'll show you that sort of stuff later on, though. Downforce. This is very simple. The higher the number, the more more drag on the car, which can be very useful on occasion. But it also helps stick the car to the ground and push the car into the ground when you're at higher speed. So when you're doing high speed drifting, if you're using a lot of downforce, you'll find that the car doesn't really want to rotate. It will more want to just plow forward and not really flick into the corner. It'll give you a load of grip. But there is a downside to downforce as well, is it does just make you inherently fast, especially in the higher speed sections. You are just going to be quicker with downforce than someone that's running none. It's just how downforce works. ECU, this is how you can adjust your engine output directly on the ECU. There is power restrictor here as well, and there is a slight difference between the two, depending on what you're trying to achieve. And I'll explain that in a minute. Ballast is pretty much as simple as it sounds. It's weight. You can add weight, but more specifically, you can add it wherever you want. I do not have a ballast on this car at the moment. We're going to buy one shortly. If you wanted to push the weight to the rear, you'd move the ballast positioning positive to the back, which would move it more, in this case, to a more 50-50 sort of scenario, which is where you would want to go if you're going more gripped up, because then the car's balance is more equal. And if you're pushing it the other way, you're going to end up freeing up that rear end, and you know it's gonna be looser to drive and less grippy, just because there's less weight on the rear. But you can move that ballast positioning to wherever you want, which is quite nice. It's a nice touch. Transmission. This is how your gears are laid out. Very simply. If you want shorter gears, this is where you tune it. If you want longer gears, this is where you tune it. Alternatively, if you're really deep diving it, you can go really fine tune and put each gear to exactly what you want. I know a lot of people run fully customizables, so that's a thing. Turbochargers. Now, different turbochargers will have different graphs. This is very important, and we'll play into this later on. What's up, NATO? Yo, subscribe for 26 months. Goodness gracious. Woohoo! Anti-lag. Anti-lag is going to pre-spin the turbos up for you ahead of time. It's going to keep boost all of the time. That way you never have a significant drop down in boost. This is very helpful for cars that don't really have a lot of pickup in the lower end. Especially cars, especially big end, like really peaky engines on like high turbo setups. You're going to be running a run anti-lag because that'll bring those turbos in a lot earlier. Intercooler, this is just a modification. You know, you can add a bit of power with a better intercooler, nice and simple. Same for silencer or air cleaner. Silencer does also change the sound of your exhaust. Just something to think about. If you like a certain sound, you can get a certain sound with different exhausts. Exhaust manifold, again, it's just a power upgrade. Brake system, this is how good your brakes are gonna be. You can either have normal, sports, racing. Now, when it comes to drifting, most people will use normal. I believe, generally speaking, some crazy cats. Good to see you. Good to see you. Yeah, so higher brake discs and pads are better for higher tire compounds where you've got a lot more grip and you need to slow down quicker. Or, you know what I mean, you can also use the higher level brake discs. I'm just trying to be really simple here. But you can use the higher level brake discs to actually achieve more fine braking technique, which is something that I've been messing about with lately, and it's quite handy. Brake pads, same sort of deal. You know, you can mess about with this and get the brake feel that you like. You know, if you want something a bit more instant, then you're going to be using a higher brake disc and pad set versus, you know, if you want something that's a bit slower to lock up or something that takes a little longer to slow down when you're in tandem, you're going to want a normal standard or sports, for example. Hydraulic handbrake, this is very simple really. It's a hydraulic handbrake. If you don't know what a hydraulic handbrake is, it's a much better system for locking up the rear tyres than a conventional cable handbrake. A cable handbrake will generally have a bit of slack and will take a little bit of time to initiate. Where a hydraulic handbrake, when pulled, can be really quite aggressive, and it can actually snap the rear round super hard if you have it up too high. If you have it too low, it won't even lock up the rear wheels. Just something to think about. Brake balance controller. Now this is an entirely preference thing, as most people drifting will know this. Depending on how you are as a driver, depending on what brake system you're using, depending on so many different factors, your preference with this will be your own preference. Recommendation is always just to try it on every setting and find something you like and stick to it. Very simple. Steering angle kit. It's a no-brainer. You get more steering lock. Can't complain. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. Forward drive system's not relevant. Rear steering angle. If you have this on a car, I would generally recommend running it as low as possible, so then you don't have the rear wheels steering as well as your front wheel steering. You'll create some severe crab walking situations in that scenario. Your clutch and flywheel is very simple. The better clutch and flywheel, you're going to be able to change gears quicker. Super simple. Propeller shaft. Difference between a normal propeller shaft and a carbon propeller shaft. Again, very simple, and it is very simple. The carbon propeller shaft is more efficient at delivering power from the flywheel to the differential. So that's it. If you want a more efficient throttle response to rear wheel, or like throttle to rear wheel response, you're going to want a carbon propeller shaft. If you want it to feel a little lazier, run the normal, especially on some of these older cars. Now, that's one thing. Now we're going to get into the thing, into some more bits, right? Because that's just the sheet. That's just your regular ass tuning sheet, right? That's 10 minutes on its own. That's such a long conversation. Weight reductions obviously didn't take out weight. And where is it? I'm going to buy ballast and stuff real quick while I'm here. I'm hoping this game audio is not too loud, but you guys can tell me about that in a minute. Improving body rigidity. This is what I was coming here for. Improving body rigidity is increasing your chassis stiffness. If you are running older cars, generally you're going to want to put this on so then the chassis isn't twisting as much when you're throwing it around. It gives you more stability, especially when you're doing big angle throw-ins into the corners, and when you're really throwing the car around, this provides a lot of stability for a lot of older cars. If you're running something newer, a newer car like 2010 onwards, you know, something a bit more supercar even, you know, depending on what it is, those cars generally have stiffer chassis anyway. So you might not necessarily need to buy this. If you want to buy it, there's always the option, but it's not necessarily important. And I think that's all it is here. NOS is very simple. It's NOS. I don't have to tell you about that. You just boost your power by like God knows how much you need. It's super simple, but it only works in race, so it's kind of pointless knowing about. Now, this is where we get into interesting bits now. After a while, if you do a lot of like replays and stuff like this, a lot of single player driving, you're going to end up needing to change your oil because otherwise your car will randomly drop power. Restoring rigidity every 1,000 sort of miles is also recommended if you're running a lot of replays and stuff like that, because the car will start to feel wobbly after a while. Something that I was quite surprised to feel. You can feel that chassis flexing a lot more after like 1,000 miles than what you normally would. You can actually use that to your advantage in some cases, but you'd have to be really weird to do that. Wide body allows for wider tires to be put on the car, more than in terms of, like, yes, it looks good, but also another thing that you need to know is that it does also give you the option of putting wider tires on the car by about 10 to 20 millimeters on average on tire size, right? That's a considerable difference, especially with some of those, you know, like the Corvettes and stuff like that that have already got 315s on the back, 315 to 335s. Those cars are going up to like 345, 355s. Like they're getting huge tires on the rear, so they're going to be really grippy with a wide body. That's something to think about if you want to run a little less grippy, more normalized setup. That's going to be your go-to. Like running it non-wide body. Why have I got an error on my screen? Yeah, I don't need to unmute my mic and mix. Oh, that's so stupid. Alright, whatever. Engine swap. Now, we're going to get into engine swaps a bit later on, because there is some stuff to do with engine swaps that I've only just recently found out, and it feels like I'm always learning something new with this game. Different engine, or the same engine in two different cars, can have actually wildly different driving feel. And I'll explain why later on when we sort of swap this into this end. We'll swap the RB into this later on, and we'll build like a full mad car later on. But I'll also show an RB in a 350 and show you some interesting differences between a 350 powertrain and the S14 powertrain, and how the gearboxes work completely different, one being a 5-speed and one versus being a 6-speed. We'll get into all of that later on. It's a long, convoluted conversation. Now, there are a couple of other little bits in the customization stuff that do actually affect the drive of a car, especially in regards of GT itself. And this is where it gets a little bit, you know, I'm going to start diving into it a bit now because I'm not going to be revisiting this. When you are putting on the wheels that you would like to run, you will notice that I have standard and standard. There is a reason that I have standard and standard, and it's very simple for the simple fact that I like the wheels to be as they are set on the car normally. Because I like a less square wheelbase, me personally. And there's, depending on how you drive, you'll find variable success with either option. So some people like a squarer wheelbase that's a little bit more whippy. If that's the case, you're going to want to run the offset, and you're going to push that wheelbase into a more square shape than as long as a rectangle, right? A bit more square of a rectangle. If you look from wheel to wheel to wheel to wheel. Now, if you also do the rim width, you'll notice that it stretches the tires. Only a little bit on this car, but on some cars it can stretch it significantly. When you're stretching the tires on a drift car, it can make the tires not have a lot of movement. Now, when you don't have a lot of movement in the tire, that creates a few things. You end up with significantly less side bite, which is a massive thing in drifting. Like, a lot of people like a lot of side bite. Like, I know Calton, for example, likes a lot of side bite in his cars. I like a lot of forward bite, so I can run either. I prefer standard. It just gives us better sidewall lean, and you can move that sidewall around when you're driving, and really pushing it into the corner gives you a little bit more grip when you just chuck it onto the lock stop because the tire's fully leaning into it. But then that also goes into rim sizes. And a bigger sidewall is going to create more lean in the tire. More lean in the tire, more side bite, but also a little less feel. It's going to feel a little less active. It's going to feel a bit dull. If you go too high with this and run 19s, you're going to feel every bump in the road. Because there's, you know, it's going to feel super reactive all of the time. Great for some cars, great for some people. Some people really like that style. Not me personally, but you know, some people really like that. I'm a fan of somewhere in the middle. I'm a kind of middle-ish guy. You know what I mean? I don't, but it's also a visual thing. I don't really like big rims. But yeah. But that's that covered. Now there's only one other thing that you need to bear in mind. It's certain cars. This S14 being a brilliant example of this, because I didn't know about this until a couple of months ago, right? And if you're running the stock rear bumper with every other piece of aero on the wide-bodied version, you will actually have more downforce available for the rear of the car versus having the diffuser, which I thought was baffling. But you can have, I think it's 400 rear downforce on the rear of the car with a stock rear bumper, and certain cars are like this. MX-5's like this, the S14's like this. There's a couple of other, I think. But you can have a completely different aero balance depending on the parts that you're picking. If you go for a more street spec, you're going more stock, right? So like Type A's and stuff like that. You're going to be keeping it more street spec. It's going to be lower downforce. It's not really going to have as much reliant on air drag as it's going to have a reliant more on suspension. Wings also play a huge part of this. Also, the winglets, the tiny little winglets. Little tidbit of information. There's a very small difference in side bite between having like a really thin winglet and having a really big winglet. Just something for you to think about every now and then is if you want a little bit more side bite, you can kind of cheese it by putting a bigger winglet on it. And the only reason I know this is because Gran Turismo has an active air model. Completely active air model. So if you're sidewards with the air and you've got a side like a white, like that is a hitbox. It has a hitbox for the air, which is quite cool. It's pretty neat actually when you think about stuff like that. But yeah, if you're running something really low down, you're not going to have as much sideward drag. You can still get a lot of forward pushed back drag, but like if you're driving more straight, and you're on less angle, you're going to feel a lot more pull on that rear end because you've got a big scoop on the back of it. But the big wing, for example, can give you some side-to-side advantage, which is quite nice, as well as you get the higher aero downforce numbers, which is always kind of nice. Bonnet pins, tow hooks do not make any performance difference at all. They're purely cosmetic, but roll cages do make a difference in the driving. Now, each stage of this, think of it like this: 5%, 10%, and 15% more rigidity. It's basic in basic forms. That's what it is, and we discussed rigidity earlier. It's stiffening up that chassis. If you're running the and this is something that I've done in the past, is some cars don't need a lot of extra rigidity, so I only run like B or A. Some cars need a lot more, so you run the full 15% in my head. You know what I mean? It's just the 5, 10, 15 is just like a visual thing in my head, just to remember, like, oh, it's a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. But you can also combine this with no body rigidity improvements on the actual tuning, on the tuning shop, and have a very different driving feel, because you've got the standard rigidity with a stiffer roll, with a big roll cage. That will stiffen it up, but it won't stiffen it up as much as the improved body rigidity, because if I remember rightly, the body rigidity is like an extra 25%. It's crazy. Other than that, that is it in regards to actual performance affecting modification and what the basics of each of those are.